Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for a movie? Welcome to the Behind the Slate podcast. I am your host, Aaron Strand. Thank you so much for coming out to our very first show here at the Terra Theater. Yeah! We will be here every other month going forward, so I'm super excited. The Behind the Slate podcast, if you don't know us, our mission is about making the greatest films ever made accessible to everyone. But, as you probably know, it's 2026, and shit's kind of crazy right now. And it's got me wondering, as I see these fascists in the government and in the private sector, trying to disenfranchise normal working class people. It's got me asking myself, what is the point of watching movies, honestly? And while I'm not naive enough to think that movies can save the world, I do think that movies are good at three really important things. Number one, they can help us contextualize and give perspective on what we are seeing in the world. Number two, they can give us hope by telling us stories of people that have overcome things much harder than what we've gone through. And number three, they are really good at bringing people together, where hopefully they can meet and talk in person and then go out into the world and make a real difference. And that's why for 2026, for the entire year, our programming at the Plaza and Terra Theater is devoted to Films Against Fascism. But luckily, I got some friends to help me out. So first of all, we got Indivisible ATL in the house. If you are unfamiliar with Indivisible, they are the national group behind the No Kings protest, but our local division, Indivisible ATL, has a million more amazing resources. They've got a workshop going on this Saturday at Candler Park, teaching protesters' rights. That's gonna be awesome. They're building up to No Kings 3 on March 28th, and we got Al from Indivisible ATL hanging out in the lobby. So if you want to get connected, go talk to them. Go on to www.indivisibleatl.com, sign up for their mailing list, and they've got so many resources of how to get connected here in our local community. Number two, we got a living legend with us. You may know him as Goth Dad. Mr. Dusty Gannon is with us. Give it up for Dusty. Dusty is not only an amazing artist, activist, but he's going to be coming up on stage as soon as the film is over to share his own personal experience with this story, having watched this film before going and serving as a captain in the U.S. Army in Afghanistan. This guy actually fought a war of insurgency and saw it all and did it all after seeing this movie. So you're going to want to stick around and see that. Last but not least, I have my good buddy Joseph Karg here in the house. Now, if you got to see our merch table, you saw that we have all custom designs, t-shirts, and posters. Joe Karg is designing custom graphics for all of our Films Against Fascism all year. Our merch is available on a sliding scale to try to meet any budget, and a percentage of all the sales are going to a different nonprofit every month. This month is a nonprofit called Odd Paws. It is an animal rescue nonprofit in Athens, Georgia. This is run by Dusty's wife, Scarlett Gannon. They do amazing work saving animals out in Athens, so we are really happy to support them. But Joe's got an amazing project that I would love to invite him up here to tell you a little bit more about. So take it away, Joe.
Thank you so much. Every time you hand the mic off to me, I feel like I have to comment on your energy. It's so amazing. I feel like I can't match it. I'm doing all the poster design. Well, I guess we're sort of collaborating on the poster design and designing the t-shirts for every one of the films this year for this run. I think it's incredible. I think what Aaron's doing here is also really amazing. I wish more stuff like this happened in Atlanta. I'm such a film geek, and I love a great reason to go out and watch a classic movie. So anyhow, I've got a Kickstarter right now for a comic book anthology project called I Feel Doomed. Everybody who got one of those little comics, there's a QR code on there that'll take you to the Kickstarter link if you want to go check it out. It's incredible. It's a mix of a bunch of professionals who are people that are like storyboard artists and comic book artists, people that worked on Rick and Morty and Road to El Dorado and Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, as well as a handful of students who I've mentored. I teach up at Kennesaw State University, and I sort of cherry-picked the best students there and kind of mentored them for their first time being published anywhere. and the stories are really, really great. It's going to be a 400-page collection. There's 30 stories total, and they all deal with the kind of anxieties that we're facing in the world right now, how each of us is processing this idea of doom. So I highly encourage you to check it out. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to hand it back to Aaron.
Woo! Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much, Joe. Okay, let's get right to it. Guys, tonight we are watching what is undoubtedly one of the greatest films ever made. But as is so often the case when we talk about these truly epic, recognized films, so often the director's name is part and parcel with the film title, right? We got Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, James Cameron, Avatar: The Way of the Water. What? But here, raise your hand if you know the name of the director of tonight's film. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, not that many, not that many. What's his name?
Gillo Pontecorvo.
Let's go, Gillo Pontecorvo. Thank you very much. Find me after the show, I'll give you a t-shirt. Gillo Pontecorvo. And not enough people know about this man, so I want to tell you a little bit about him. Gillo Pontecorvo was born in 1920 in Pisa, Italy, to a big Jewish-Italian family where every single member of his family, at least the men, they were all doctors or mathematicians. And little Gillo, he wanted to be an artist so bad, he wanted to be a composer, and the family said no. So when it came time to go to university, he studied chemistry, but mostly he dicked around playing tennis and chasing girls. And I say all that to say, to remind us that revolutionaries are not born, they are made. Because in the late 1930s, things were getting pretty scary if you were Jewish living in fascist Italy. So Gillo followed a couple of his brothers to Paris. And there he gets involved in the sort of salon intellectual world. He starts getting into Marxism. He starts getting into anti-fascism. He's hanging out with Picasso and Sartre and all these people. But when the Nazis invaded in 1940, Gillo had to make a decision. Do you run? Do you hide? Or do you fight? Gillo Pontecorvo fled at first to the south of France, but eventually he snuck across the border back into Italy. He joined the Communist Party of Italy and for 4 years fought in the resistance against the fascists. He picked up arms and fought for his beliefs. He carried secret messages. He organized labor strikes to shut down the fascist war machine. If he had been caught at any point in time, he would have been shot in the head or sent to the death camps. And I think this speaks a real credit to his courage and his principles. Well, as soon as the war is over, Gillo, he's still a communist, he's a journalist, but then something happens that changes his life. He sees a movie. He sees a movie, Paisan, by Roberto Rossellini. Now, Paisan is an early example of Italian neo-realism, which is, I think, a very unfortunately academic name for what is a very organic style of filmmaking. See, under the fascists, Italian films were these big, gigantic spectacles. They built Cinecittà Studios, which is to this day the largest studio in all of Europe, to make these giant propaganda machines. Well, Cinecittà was heavily damaged in the war, and it was turned into a refugee camp. So the filmmakers took their cameras and they went into the streets. They started making stories about normal working class people living in the rubble of post-war Europe. They shot on location, and instead of actors, they brought real people to act in these films. That is what we now call Italian neo-realism. And it absolutely blew Gillo's mind. So he went out, he spent every lira he had on a 16mm film camera, and he spent the next 10 years of his life making self-funded documentaries, apprenticing under any director that would take him. And it wasn't until the age of 37, for all you late bloomers out there, that he made his first feature film, The Long Blue Road. He followed it up with a film called Capo, which is about a young woman surviving in a concentration camp, and that film goes on to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. So now it's 1960, and Gillo is right on the precipice of breaking through. And keep in mind, this is the era of the great Italian directors. This is the era of Fellini and Antonioni and Pasolini. But Gillo, he's a man of principle, and he has a crisis of conscience. He has left the Communist Party. He has become disillusioned after watching the Soviet Union crush the Hungarian uprising. And so he wants to turn his attention to an epic story of people fighting for their freedom against oppressors. So he turns his attention across the Mediterranean to the Algerian War of Liberation. This was a terrible war. If you could criticize this movie for anything, is that it is impossible in one film to put the scope of horror that this war was. It lasted for 8 years. 25,000 French soldiers were killed. 1 million Algerians were killed. 2 million were put into concentration camps. There was rape, there was torture, there was villages burned. It destroyed the French government, which had to completely reconstitute itself to deal with the crisis. And all while they're doing that, while they're trying to end the war, right-wing French paramilitary groups are bombing and murdering people to try to keep France in the fight. It was a mess. So Gillo goes with his writing partner, Franco Salinas, and at first they write a script about a right-wing former paratrooper who's caught up at the end of the war. And they're very excited, but their producer, not so much. And so they can't get the money, and they can't get it together, and he goes home in shame. 2 years pass, and he is contacted by a member of the FLN, which is the insurgency group that ultimately won the war and took control of Algeria. And this guy comes to him and says, "We want to make a film about the Algerian war." He says, "Great, I've got a script." The guy reads the script. He says, "This is no good. This is the Italian perspective. We want the Algerian perspective. You've got to come meet my boss, Sadi Yassef." Sadi Yassef had fought for the FLN, and he wrote an autobiography of his experience. And now, after the war, he is in charge of the Casbah Film Company. And he is looking to get a European production to come down and partner with him to train up all of his technicians. So Gillo goes back to Algeria. He talks to Sadi. He says, "Okay, sure. We'll make it from the Algerian perspective, but I want to shoot this film how I want to shoot it. And if you don't like it, you don't have to pay me." And Sadi Yassef was so impressed, he said, "Great, here's a budget. We will cast all the actors. We'll give you all the extras. We will give you access to all the real locations where these real life events actually took place. And we will give you all the military equipment you want." And Gillo said, "Great." So he and Franco Salinas, they come back to Algeria. They spend a year interviewing eyewitnesses and rewriting the script with Sadi Yassef, who you'll see in this film, he plays Jafar, which is a fictionalized version of himself. Now, they cast all local, normal people. And most importantly, we got to talk about the lead of this film, Brahim Hajjaj. Gillo saw Brahim in a market one day, and because he looks like the historical figure Ali Lapointe, he said, "Oh, you got to come be in my movie." Brahim Hajjaj was an illiterate peasant. He had never seen a film in his life. Just imagine that. You've never seen a film, and here you are starring in this movie. He gives what I have no hesitation in saying the greatest debut performance in cinema history. And I want you to remember, as you see this guy on screen, he has never seen a movie before. He took his paycheck, he went back to the farm, he bought all new farm equipment. The only trained actor in this film is Jean Martin, the French actor who plays Colonel Mathieu. He was himself a veteran of the French War in Vietnam. He was a prolific stage actor. He was actually in the original productions of Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot and Endgame, which is totally awesome. But he had been banned from the French theater for being an outspoken critic of the Algerian War, so he was perfect. They shot this film on location in the Casbah where these historical events took place, all on a single handheld 16mm Ariflex camera. And of course, little Gillo, I told you, he wanted to be a composer. He got to co-write the music with his good friend and future living legend, Ennio Morricone. The film premiered to a rapturous reception at the Venice Film Festival. It won the Golden Lion. The French delegation, without having seen the movie, walked out of the award ceremony. The film opened to a rapturous reception in Italy and Algeria. It was banned until 1971 in France and England. Not a lot of people talk about the England part, but England banned it too. When it did finally open in France, screenings were met with bomb threats, and in some cases, actual violence from far-right groups that would come and throw dirt at the screen and get in fights with the audience. But the few right-wing critics who actually watched the damn thing came away saying, "You know what, we actually look pretty good." And I think that can best be summed up by what one critic said, which is that Gillo Pontecorvo, it's clear that his sympathies lie with the insurgents, but his allegiance is to the truth. And that allegiance is why we are here in this theater today watching this film 60 years later. I will be back as soon as it's over with our special guest, Dusty Gannon. But in the meantime, please sit back, relax, and enjoy Gillo Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers.
All right. Hello. All right. If you have to take off, please get home safe. Thank you so much for coming, and be sure to check us out next month. We'll be back at the Plaza Theater playing Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist. It's going to be good. Well, as we all take a deep breath and kind of process that whole film, I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Dusty Gannon. Yes, please put your hands together. Dusty.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to start this off, again, as we're sort of kind of calming down from the film just ending on that climax, which I can't believe. I cannot believe that was staged and all directed at the end. I mean, it's truly amazing.
Yeah, it feels to me like every time I view the movie, it's like it feels like archival footage, but it is completely, the masterwork of film. Making something feel very real.
In the original American release, they inserted a title card at the beginning of the film that said, "No newsreel footage was used in the making of this movie," because people were so convinced that it was actual footage that had been shot. Well, why don't we start off by going back a little bit in your own story? Tell me a little bit, how did you first get into movies? How did you first come into contact, with cinephilia? And a little bit of your origin story, at least as it pertains to this art form.
Yeah, I think movies. I grew up. I was in a military family, so film was a really good way for me to always have something to kind of do. My dad was always gone, or we were traveling a lot. So I think it's a very common occurrence when you grow up as a military brat that friends can kind of be hard to come by. So I spent a lot of time watching movies when I was very young and as a teenager. And I grew up in rural Georgia. I grew up in Maxey's, Georgia, which is it's 200 people in Oglethorpe County.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I was a very weird kid. I was the singular goth kid of that entire county. So I found things like music and movies were kind of a, refuge away from this sort of droll mediocrity of my life. So to kind of, I guess, give you reference to probably why I am talking about this movie in particular. So I joined the Army in 2007, and that was at a time where both wars in the global war on terror that we were heavily involved in, namely Afghanistan and Iraq, were kicking off pretty intensely. And that was in a time where it was the casualty rates kind of skyrocketed around that time. The troop surges started in 2008 especially. And I joined around that time because I was a high school dropout. I couldn't really deal with Oglethorpe County's education system, so I dropped out of school. And I was working at a movie theater and a car parts factory. And, it was just kind of I realized this is where I'm going to probably be for a very long time. So joining the Army for me was to get out of that in a large way. But it was also to kind of, explore myself and see what I was made of. I was not politically oriented at the time. I didn't really understand. I mean, the naivete of youth, there's a heavy involvement in my decision to do that.
Yeah.
But, so I joined the Army National Guard. I was enlisted as a paratrooper, here in Georgia, and I did that for a few years. But I had a knack for it. Something about the sort of collectivism of it, and just like working together to do something that's above yourself and putting yourself physically on the line. That really appealed to me. And I had some of my sergeants were like, you're like pretty decently educated. Like you should think about going to become an officer. So I applied and I went to the officer route through UGA and their ROTC department. And which led to this movie, actually, because I had a mentor that was like really important to me. He was a lieutenant colonel named John Fickle, and he actually showed us this film because he went to the War College to become a colonel, and the Pentagon was like showing this to field grade officers. So basically, once you become a major or above, like people that are on the track to become generals, essentially, or take large commands, and he showed this film because he was like, this is a film that's going to make you understand like the predicament that you're going to be very much so part of very soon, and to understand insurgency and counterinsurgency as it is. That's kind of like the background, I guess, so to speak.
It's absolutely mind-blowing. I think they started playing this film at the Pentagon around 2004, 2005. So it's interesting to see it kind of trickle down into your own officer training. Do you remember anything about that screening? I mean, here you are. I mean, you had been a member of the ROTC, but you had not deployed overseas. So what's going through your head as you're sort of imagining what your future would be like? And I mean, especially with this film as some sort of cipher, weird sort of crystal ball kind of thing.
Yeah, so this was like probably 2011. I mean, or maybe late 2010, but this is right before I commissioned and went back to the Army on active duty this time. And then when I commissioned, I went on like as a full-time soldier. So, but I'd been in the Army, like in the Guard for a few years, and I'd done all this training, and I like kept getting stood up for deployments, and then they would be like, "Oh, never mind." Like, and it was just bizarre because I was like, "Oh, I'm about to go to war." Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, I'm about to go to war. No, I'm not. And something about that process, I think, was the beginning of this like seed of doubt that was planted in me. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, what is this? Why do I spend all my time training to kill people? Because I was in the infantry. It's like, my job is to fight. And all I'm training to do is kill people that I don't know, that are probably more similar to myself than anybody, above us. So I was starting to have these kind of weird feelings of doubt about what I was doing. So kind of fast forward to, Colonel Fickle showing us this film. I had actually talked to him about it very privately. I was like, "Sir, I don't know how I feel about this." Because, I don't know if I can do what I need to do, because I'm starting to kind of question this whole system. And he had been deployed like 4 times. I mean, and Colonel Fickle is still like very much so a person that I admire. And he said something to me that I'll never forget, and I carried this through my deployment in Afghanistan, and I carry it every day of my life, and it's something that I try to live by now. He said, "Dustin, look, war is going to be fought no matter what. We don't get to decide this. What our job is to do is to go and do it morally as best as possible, because it's an evil thing and we have to be moral." And so that was kind of a reassurance, but it was funny because we watched this film and I was like, like soldiers getting together is always kind of like a ridiculous thing. They're always just it's like locker room bullshit, it's like, "Oh yeah, war movie, cool, let's watch the war movie." But like, at that time, I started like watching this movie, and I was like, I identify more with these people than I do with the French soldiers, And there's like, I think this film is like really, really even, right? Like, it's not like, look at the horrible sword. Like, I mean, they do horrible things, and so do the guerrillas, but it's the war. It presents everybody, I think, very fairly, and like, Colonel Matu is like he has respect for his enemy. He even has like compassion for them. And I found that like really amazing. And I was like, wow, you can still respect these people and go to war against them. And the whole thing can be ugly, but like you don't have to give in to your lesser nature. But it was just, I think the thing that really like captured me about this film was like, I found myself tending more towards understanding the need to resist against the system that has brought these people, not necessarily the soldiers themselves, but the thing that made them be there to begin with, I think is what I found I identified with most.
Wow. So then you get deployed, you go into an active combat zone. I'm sure Battle of Algiers was not at top of mind, but the sort of the lessons and the feelings that were cultivated from that part of your training, how did that translate into the active field?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the big things when I was deployed, so I deployed as a platoon leader, so I had 30 largely kind of like kids under my responsibility. I was deployed to Kandahar City in Afghanistan. This is the final combat deployment, so this is like 2013 to 14. And our job was like, it was my platoon and my friend Lou Griffith's platoon, and we had responsibility of the entire city of Kandahar's like security, essentially. 400,000 people. We were to go patrol the city with our Afghan counterparts, train them up, get them ready, take them out on combat patrols, essentially looking for the Taliban, and then securing the city for the upcoming election, because this is when Hamid Karzai, even the Afghans have term limits, hint, hint. So they were like, we need to replace our president. So the whole thing was, they were going to have their first like legitimate election. And by and large, it was actually pretty legitimate, which is surprising. But, we would go on these patrols in these like very Taliban-friendly neighborhoods in the city with our Afghan counterparts. And I think for me, like some of the lessons I learned from watching this film, but just, sort of like you said, it's not like the exact root of, I wasn't like, the Battle of Algiers is like what I need to pay attention to. But things like this were bricks in a wall of my fortitude to like commit to treating people with respect, but also like doing the job, because like when you're involved in counterinsurgency, the reality of it is like, you are disrupting people's life. Like, I remember we were driving through this one really impoverished neighborhood one time, and like we had these MRAP mine-resistant vehicles. They're like, large, like you would probably see it and be like, that's a tank. And we would drive around in these, things from neighborhood to neighborhood, and then we would go do foot patrols. And one day we ran through like a whole bunch of electrical wires, and we probably turned off the power to this neighborhood for like, I don't know how long. And immediately I was like, shit, can you imagine like your supposed friendly government people coming through, because we had the Afghans with us, and all of a sudden you don't have power for a week, and that's just like on the low end of things. So to me it was, I think a lot of it was just kind of understanding that like you have to be as respectful as you can, but I also had a major responsibility, which was to protect my soldiers, and that was my primary responsibility. It was like, I need to get these. The average age of my platoon was 21 years old, and that's very young. Like usually it's like 25, 26, because you have your older, sergeants and stuff. These were kids like straight out of high school, basic training, infantry school, Germany for a few months. Boom, Afghanistan. So like they were my kids basically, and it was really difficult to kind of balance the two sometimes, because sometimes you have to make decisions and turn to your kids and be like, shut up, we're doing this, keep going. You don't need to understand it, you need to trust me, and we need to move forward.
Yeah. I'm curious, there's a line in this film that Colonel Mathieu says, where, he's talking to the reporters, and in a very resonant line where he says, if you think that France should be in Algeria, you need to accept the consequences.
Yeah.
What is a line like that? Like, how does that resonate with you based on your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, as a soldier, you can really understand that, and it is despicable, you know. And I've spent a lot of the last like 12, 13 years of my life kind of reconciling, you know, what I participated in. But, you know, I can still look back and be in that mindset and like kind of understand, you know, and I don't think there's anything that like justifies like torture or atrocities of warfare. But you can like understand why it's allowed. But I think it's very like, it's kind of the crux of like being a soldier is like, yeah, I mean, if you're going to put us in this position, you're putting soldiers amongst populace, like soldiers are going to do what soldiers are going to do. So, you know, I think it's a very like, that is in and of itself sort of a symptom of colonialism and empire is like, yeah, of course they're going to try to justify their own actions through the guise of, well, you made us do it, so what do you want us to do, you know?
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your journey out of the military. So how long were you deployed, and then what led you to leave?
Yeah, so I was deployed for like 9 months. It was right at 9 months. And we got out, you know, and it was a very mild deployment. I mean, it wasn't like shootouts and crazy stuff all the time. It was mostly boring. It was mostly just like kind of wandering around. But, you know, there was this sentiment because we were that last combat deployment. It was like, hey, look, we got to train these Afghans up and get them ready to take responsibility and take the fight to the Taliban because we're going to leave in the next, you know, so many years. But that was like the sort of mission statement in so many words. But we understood that it was total bullshit. Like we were training these Afghans. And it's not like how we have the military where you enlist and you go to basic training and then you're like in the military. They like show up and they're like, okay, you're in the army today. Here's your ammunition, which is part of their payment, and some food, and then like a couple US dollars equivalent. And you know, these guys were like, a lot of them were like literally high on hash or heroin when we're on patrol. You know, and it's just like, again, these are symptoms, but the broader context of that was corruption. It was just absolutely corrupt. Like, not just on the Afghan side. Like, we would do these patrols and stuff, and then you go back, and there was just like such like glad hand self-aggrandizement on behalf of the command above us. And I was like, what are you guys, like, why are we celebrating this? We didn't do anything. Like, literally, my soldiers would ask me all the time. We'd go out on patrol, and we'd be in these like super Taliban-friendly neighborhoods where it's like there are probably IEDs that we just didn't step on, basically. And my soldiers would be like, "What are we doing here?" And I was like, "You're here to take care of each other and to get the hell out of here altogether, right?" And then they would go, "Okay, yeah, Roger, sir." But I had started feeling like those seeds of doubt were sown years before I deployed. You know, like in college, you know, I studied religious history, so I studied a lot of like Chinese religion was kind of my main focus, but like, you know, Islam was a big thing that I studied for obvious reasons, and just learning about all these different ways that people have processed reality and existence, it started to feel like there's more about us that unifies us than that separates us. And I know it's like kind of cliche, but it's so fucking true. Like, and I started to see that like interweaving throughout history and throughout different people. It's like, yeah, like, you know, feudal Japan and, you know, this dynasty of China and these people in, you know, in Mecca, like there's so many things that are similar, and that was like, yeah, something's wrong with this. So, you know, being also a student of history, I started to understand the sort of historical context of why this stuff was wrong too. Like, and I very ironically, in college, my last semester of college, the Army contacted me and they were like, "Hey, you didn't take a military history course," and I was like, "Oh." And they're like, "You need to do that to graduate and commission." So I took the first thing that I could, and it was empire in modern day, 1500 to current day, and it was about how military overreach causes empires to rise and fall. And that was by an amazing professor named Dr. John Morrow Jr. He's probably my favorite professor of any course I took. And his son was, in the special forces, and I got the sense from him, when you barely can talk to somebody sometime, and you just get the sense of who they are. And I just got the sense of him right away that he was real, and he was very against what was happening. And I felt very safe confiding in him. And we got to the current day in that course, and he was talking about how basically we were in that situation of these two counterinsurgency wars that were failing, and the immense amount of money and lives and all this craziness that we had committed to, that we've expended for these wars. And I remember one day specifically, very end of the course, and I kind of similar to with Colonel Fickle, I had him, just him and I privately, and I came up to him and I was like, yeah, I'm graduating obviously, and I'll be leaving to go back to the Army. But I was like, Dr. Morrow, I got to be honest with you, I don't think I believe in any of this anymore. And he's like, look, my son was in the Green Berets, and he's like, my son's a black man. You got to understand, black men in the Green Berets, that's not normal. That's not a usual thing. And he spent so much time working so hard to become that. And he dealt with so much naked racism and dealing with all this bullshit to get there. And then when he got injured in Iraq and he came back with PTSD, the Army just fucked him over. And he's like, so you need to understand one thing. You cannot get out of this situation easily, and the only way for you to get through this is through it. Go through it, and you can't quit. You need to just get through it. But I'll never forget, he looked at me square in the eye and he said, and when you get back, you need to get the hell out of there, and you need to leave the Army, and you never need to look back. And I was like, yes, sir. And so I kind of, there was all this sentiment that I didn't know how to process, and a lot of people think of going to war as a break, you got to have courage to go to war. It was actually a cowardly act for me. There's Tim O'Brien, who wrote The Things They Carried. There's this whole thing in that book where he was a Vietnam veteran. He said, there's this moment where he could have, left to Canada and gone away, but he was afraid not to because of public chastisement and scrutiny from people he knows, his parents, the guy who runs the laundromat, the whatever. People are brutal, and I was the same way. I was afraid not to go to war, and that was a cowardly act, but I did it. And then when I got back, I came back I was stationed in Germany, and I took Dr. Morrow's words to heart, and I was like, all right, time to get the hell out of here. So I left active duty in 2016, but the Army's, it's just hard, it's a whole culture, it's everything. They had their sort of talons in me. So I stayed in the reserves for a couple of years, because one of the first things that they they get you on is what are you going to do? And I was like, I have no idea. I was like, I think I'm going to go to grad school. And they were like, sure, yeah. Good luck with that. Why don't you just stay in the reserves, though? Because we'll pay you, you'll get some of your benefits, and you can leave whenever you want because you've already fulfilled your obligation to time. And I was like, okay. So I did that. And that was the kind of the final nail in the coffin for me, because I came back, I took a company command where I was in a training unit, where I was training NCOs, so sergeants, to go to drill sergeant school in the reserves. And we'd train them up, send them there, they'd come back, and then we would take over one training rotation of basic training every year. And I had this one kid, he was from active duty, he was from the Ranger Regiment, which is these guys are elite. These are your shock troopers. They are the most, outside of special forces, these are the most elite of the Army. And this kid came to me, he was I just saw myself in him, and I just identified with him, and we just had a lot of similar experiences. And then he came to drill one month, and he came up to me and he was like, I could tell he'd been crying, and I was like, "Hey man, what's going on?" And he said, "Sir, I'm a danger to myself, and I need to go to the hospital." And I was like, "Well, what's been happening?" And he told me a story about how his best friend had got vaporized in front of him in Afghanistan by an IED, like a pressure plate. He like stepped on it, and he just like literally disappeared. So we activated this sort of system in the reserves of like getting this kid to care, and it was a catastrophe. Like we sent him to the hospital, and we put him on activated orders so he could get active duty pay. So we were just like, he didn't have to worry about his job because his job was commission pay based. And they fucked up every bit of the paperwork, and he started getting bills for the care that we were sending him to. He was not receiving any pay. His wife and 2 kids were like waiting for money, and it took like a year and a half for it to get all fixed. And that was the sort of the last straw for me, because like at that point I'm like heavily reading about, the colonial militarism of America at this point, like things like, what we did in Guatemala, which led to hundreds of thousands of people being killed in the 50s. Like, and I'm like, I can't even help this one kid who is begging for us to save his life. And he has done nothing but serve this country and give up his best years of his youth. This is a kid in his 20s. And we can't even look him in the eye and say, yeah, we're going to help you, and we're going to do the one thing that we promised to do. And that was one thing that I kind of, in my own personal fear of going to war, was like, if I step on a pressure plate, if I get shot, if whatever, I know that at least they're going to take care of like the financial end of this, and they're going to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. But that's a lie, because once you've utilized you've sort of fulfilled your purpose as a soldier, and that utility is gone, it is all about getting you pushed under the rug. You're the dirt under the carpet at that point. And some people, it works out pretty well, but a lot of people, like a statistically significant amount of soldiers and service members, have to suffer the consequences of these systems failing them. And it's all by design, because this is like how empire works. This is how these for-profit systems that create these forever wars to make huge sums of money work. And you are a drain against that sum of money. And so, yeah, I got out, and I became a firefighter in Gwinnett for 5 years. I was a firefighter paramedic just down the road from here. And then music kind of took off. So I was like, well, I've always been like a person that's like, say yes to the thing that the universe presents to you. So I left that job, and I've been doing music and making stupid videos on the internet ever since. But when I grew this large like social media platform, like it happened really quickly. It happened a lot during the pandemic and the lockdowns. And I started to kind of realize like, oh, this is just another corporation like commodifying our time. We're like all sitting here just like staring at these stupid videos. So I was like, what if I use this to actually use my experiences to speak out against the system that created me? And I got really involved with like About Face, which is a veterans anti-war advocacy group that's like leading the charge of against like our current administration's straight up fascist bullshit as far as the veterans are concerned. But I also met people like Greg Stoker, who's running for Congress in Texas. He's an Army Ranger, amazing guy. Our friend Travis out there in Texas as well. And I found like community that I hadn't felt since I had been in the Army again. And I was like, oh, this is what this is all for. Like, I'm not a big like fate person, but sometimes the universe like pushes you in a direction. And so I've been kind of committed to this this anti-war activism, but also now as we find ourselves, I've I've known it for years, and I've been saying it. Like if any of you were at any of the Vision Videos shows with my former band, you probably heard me say, like, we live in a fascist country. This is not, and that was before Trump got back in again. Now it's just naked and it's out in the open. And I think that's like ultimately why this movie is like important to me now. Is like there's a lot of uncomfortable feelings I think that people have generally when they watch this movie, because the tactics that they use in this film and that they used obviously in real life in history against French colonialism they're messy. It's terrorism. They gunned down civilians in the streets. They bombed cafes. They did these things. But I think it's like really important to note that think about, I was thinking about this when we were watching the movie. Think about it this way. Like, for those of you that are like really tired, because I'm tired right now from all this shit that's been happening in this country. Think about if ICE was gunning down your neighbors in the street every day for decades. How tired would you be? And what would you allow? What becomes more of a thing that you're going to be permissive of as a tactic against resistance against these incredible regimes of power that are brutally suppressing you? I mean, and I think one of the scenes that really gets me is when they strike and they're forcing people to go to work because they're extracting wealth from the labor of these colonized people. So they're killing your neighbors, they're killing your family, they're forcing you to work for machinery that is against its own interest. Things change as pressure cooks. And I don't think anything justifies like ultimately, terrorism or that level of violence. But I think that it's like, I read this one quote about the movie where it was the cinematographer that was interviewed. His name was Marcello Gatti. That's right. Yeah. And he basically said, like, look, because he grew up in Italy during fascism as well under Mussolini, and he said, look, this movie, shows that they're not, like, these methods aren't right. It's like what they had to deal with the things at the time. So anyway, I think there's a lot of value though to be gained about like watching this and like what we can apply today. And for me, the biggest thing is like decentralization of resistance, right? Like the army through Colonel Matu is like, we need to, to know the enemy is to defeat them, essentially, is what he says. So basically, we live in a day and age where like your phone is like actively monitoring you and tracking every single thing you do, your location, who you're talking to, who like what you're doing. So, organizing resistance and fomenting these things is very difficult, but what works is ultimately not the bombings and the shootings and the killing and the violence. It's what you see in the end, which is this sort of massive popular resistance through nonviolence to the regime that is so overwhelming and shuts down any ability for it. And it's not without its risk. Obviously, people are killed and people are brutalized, and it's going to be messy, as it always is. But to me, that's like the value now of this movie is like it's changed, so much in timber for me that it's now this thing of here's like why we need to look back so we can look forward. Because I think, in my opinion, it's not the opinion of Behind the Slate, but in my opinion, I think we're just getting started with how bad that this is going to get here. I hope I'm wrong. I mean, but things like this are going to matter, and having, like, I think that, like what you're saying before the movie, like watching this is going to give you value to just understanding the framework of resistance. And whatever that looks like, because it's not going to look like this, obviously. It's going to be very different. but it's going to give you at least the comprehension that like this is how we can resist and how we can foment against this system.
Yeah. We got enough time for like 2 questions.
Sorry.
No. It's all good.
Talking.
No. It's an amazing story. But if anybody do we have anybody has a question either for Dusty or about the film in general? We can probably thread that needle. We can stand up here in silence all night. Yeah, over here. Here, I'm going to come to you with the mic.
I'll join you halfway. That's fine. Hi, Dusty. Once again, thank you so much for using your platform to courageously speak the truth. The question I had was that it seemed like the Battle of Algiers was pretty significantly influential towards you and your mentality as you went back into service or into service. What scenes or moments from the film kept coming back to you while you were out there?
I don't know about. It's been so long now that I don't know that there's any like one scene that at that point that I was thinking about. But now, you know, I mean, the ending to me is very stark and just very like forthright about the point of the movie. You know, when they're like, "What do you want?" They literally like end it. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a movie like that where the opposition asks arguably the protagonist in a large sense of like, what do you want? And they just say it. And I think that that's like really amazing. One of my favorite scenes, and I remember this from back then, was the scene when the 3 women before they go to plant the bombs, and they strip their Algerian identity and their Islamic identity, and you can see how uncomfortable it is for them and how they're like sort of pantomiming, and it's just this like very incongruent, weird, high strangeness for them that they're even participating in this, but they're so committed and devoted to the idea because it's so important that that happens. And I think that also just in general, the movie, one thing that especially catches me now about this film is like, a lot of these movies, especially at this time, a movie like this, you'd expect it to be like all men doing everything. And I think revolution and resistance has to be egalitarian, and it has to be throughout all walks of our society to actually be effective against the system that we're like railing against. And I think that this film does a really good job at showing like why this was effective was because it wasn't one sort of caste or cohort of that society. It was the illiterate, you know, like street guy working with the very high-minded academics who were like helping organize and lead resistance, but also the women and the kids. I mean, everybody was sort of in on this because that's how it is only possible, is when everybody has to put their skin in the game, not just a certain handful of people, because it's easy to destroy that resistance. But when it is the entirety of everybody, and it is done so in a way that gives everybody responsibility in a meaningful way, then I think that's how you can see like progress happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Oh, we got one. Oh, yeah, we got one over here. Let's go.
So to me, one of the most striking sequences is when the commissar of the police actually leads the bombing in there. And it just, I don't know. There's something about the state itself being the perpetrators of violence outside of it. Could you guys speak on the way that's portrayed for a second? I don't know. That's just kind of floating around in my head.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's almost cliche at this point to us now, but at that time, I mean, thinking contextually to time, you know, police forces were seen as like public servants and people that like served the public safety. Like police were not militarized like they are now, where they are rolling around in MRAPs and shit that I used in Afghanistan. So to see like But that was the perception, I think, and that's always been the perception in the Western world. It's like, oh, the friendly policeman is there to help you. No, the fuck they're not. They're absolutely here to protect capital. They are here to protect the system that takes advantage of, disenfranchises, abuses, murders, and extracts wealth from these colonized people. And it's almost like a really interesting bait and switch that they do with that character, because the whole thing that predicates that whole scene is like him talking to that one police administrator guy or whatever, and he's like, from Paris they're saying we need to like lock everything down and we need to create barricades and we need to control everything. And he's like, well, I don't think that's the right way to do it. And you're almost like, oh, like he's not a bad dude. And then he blows up a building and like murders like 30 people. Because, I mean, yeah, some of those that work forces, right?
Yeah, I really have nothing to add to that. I really well said. Well, Dusty, I want to thank you so much for joining us. One of the things that I want to continue to do throughout the year is it's all fun and great to play old movies but there is a distancing effect with those movies. Even though there's so much, like we can see prescience here, it's also came out in 1966. So having folks like you come out, share your stories, ground these films in a lived reality of today is something that we're going to continue to do with these films throughout the year. And one of the great lessons of cinema, but also in listening to your stories that I can't help but think of, I think about the Japanese filmmakers that I love, the like post-war Japanese guys of Ozu and Kurosawa and Mitsuguchi and all these guys. And I think about like what it would have been like to have been an American being fed all of this propaganda about how everyone in Japan is evil. And which is just so patently false. But when you reduce everything into good and bad, you get to erase the humanity of everyone. And if you were to subscribe to that, then you would have, destroyed all these artists, much less like all these other innocent people. The same lesson applies to people in the armed forces. We can't paint just because you have a uniform on. You don't know that individual's story. You don't know what they're thinking. Yeah. You don't know what they're doing.
Oh yeah. And I mean, like one thing that I've taken to heart from I spent over 15 years in the military altogether. And one thing that I absolutely know is that like the majority of people in the military are working class. They're not there for ideological reasons. They're not there to be the jackbooted thug that that I even tend to think of them as in a lot of ways now. I think there's a lot of like goodness in the hearts of people, but I think that systems that do demonstrably denigrate people into objects or people in like when ICE murders somebody for helping a woman stand up when they're brutalizing her and they call that person a domestic terrorist, that is dehumanization on such an extreme level. And those systems have to be dismantled so that we can put these people that I think a lot of people that do end up joining, the military, I don't know about ICE now, but that join the military at least, or even the police, like I don't think most people join thinking they're going to make things worse or terrible. I think there's a very select few people that do actually do that. But it just goes to show that like we have to be honest about like the way that our government handles these systems where people are armed and operate with like relative impunity when it comes to people's lives. And if they are not serving the public embetterment and the public good, then we need to like completely get rid of them. So, I mean, straight up, fuck ICE, abolish it, fuck those motherfuckers.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Y'all give it up for Dusty Gannon. thank you so much for coming. And yeah, come out next month, March 26th, for Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist at Plaza.
Oh, one last thing. If you are animal people, my wonderful wife, I can't see you because I'm getting blinded. Scarlett Gannon, she runs Odd Paws Rescue, as aforementioned before the film. If you follow her on the gram or whatever, all the bullshit, just sharing, liking, doing all that stuff with her stuff. It's a nonprofit organization that goes a long way. You don't have to contribute monetarily, but she, I think last year she adopted out over 100 cats, which is crazy. So yeah, I love you and great job. So
shout out Odd Paws. Shout out. Hell yeah. Thanks y'all so much.
Cheers. Take care.